The Echoes of 50 Years, Chapter 1, The Last Dance. The year was 1972. Wilmington, North Carolina, shimmered under a spring sun, its air thick with the scent of salt and blooming azaleas. Martha Jenkins, barely 19, felt as if her entire world revolved around Thomas Anderson. Their love story was a whirlwind of stolen glances in the university library, late-night talks on the beach, and whispered promises beneath the ancient oaks. Thomas, with his bright, intelligent eyes and a smile that could disarm a battalion, was everything she'd ever dreamed of. He was her future, her everything. They danced that night under the soft glow of fairy lights strung across the backyard of a friend's graduation party. The music was Fleetwood Mac, mellow and melancholic, a strange counterpoint to the vibrant joy in Martha's heart. Thomas held her close, his chin resting on her hair. "I don't want to go, Martha," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Not without you." Tears pricked her eyes. He was leaving for Vietnam in a week. The draft, an unavoidable tide that pulled young men from their lives, their loves, their futures. "You'll come back," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You have to. We have so much to do, a life to build." He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. His thumbs gently stroked her cheeks. "I will. I promise you, Martha. I'll fight my way back to you, no matter what." He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of salt, longing, and the bitter tang of impending separation. It was a promise, a prayer, a desperate plea to fate. A week later, she stood on the tarmac, the roar of the planes drowning out her sobs. He turned, just before disappearing into the belly of the transport plane, and gave her a salute, a defiant, hopeful gesture. She watched until the plane was a distant speck in the sky, carrying her heart, her hopes, her very soul into the unknown. The first few months were a torture of waiting. Letters arrived, thin, creased envelopes bearing his hurried script, filled with reassurances, descriptions of jungle heat, and fierce declarations of love. Martha wrote back, pouring out her heart, telling him of her classes, her friends, her profound loneliness. She even hinted at a secret, a tender seed of new life blooming within her, but decided to wait, to tell him face to face when he returned. It would be their beautiful surprise. Then the letter stopped. Silence. A deafening, terrifying silence that stretched for weeks. Each day, a new layer of dread. Martha called the recruitment office daily, her voice growing hoarser, her hope thinning to a fragile thread. "No new information, ma'am. Casualties are high, ma'am." The generic, sterile replies chipped away at her sanity. One Tuesday morning, the knock came. 2 uniformed officers stood on her porch, their faces grim, their caps held respectfully in their hands. Her mother, seeing them, let out a small cry. Martha knew, before they even spoke. Her legs gave way. "We regret to inform you, Miss Jenkins, that Private Thomas Anderson was reported missing in action on October 23, 1972. Following extensive search efforts, he has been presumed killed in action." The words hung in the air, a death knell. Killed. Thomas. Her Thomas. The world tilted on its axis. The sun, just moments ago, warm on her skin, now seemed to mock her with its indifferent brightness. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the worn rug, the official notice a cold, cruel piece of paper clutched in her trembling hand. He was gone. Her love, her future, and the tiny, fluttering life within her, a life Thomas would never know, a secret burden that would weigh on her soul for decades to come. Chapter 2: A Secret Life. The grief was a physical entity, a crushing weight that pinned Martha to her bed for weeks. Her mother, a quiet, stoic woman, tried to comfort her, but words felt hollow, meaningless. The doctor confirmed what Martha already suspected. She was pregnant, 2 months along, a living, breathing echo of Thomas. Her parents, traditional and deeply religious, were horrified. An unmarried mother in 1972? It was a scandal, a stain on their family name. "You must give him up, Martha," her father pleaded, his voice cracking with a mixture of shame and despair. "For your sake, for his." But Martha couldn't. Every flutter, every kick, was a direct link to Thomas. A tangible piece of him that still existed. "No," she said, her voice weak but firm. "He's all I have left." To escape the whispers and the pitying glances in Wilmington, Martha agreed to move back to her parents' small, conservative town in rural Kansas. There, among cornfields and quiet lives, she could disappear, reinvent herself. She told everyone Thomas had died, which was true in a way, but she never revealed the full truth of their relationship, or of the child she carried. David was born in the spring of 1973, a tiny, perfect bundle of life with Thomas's dark hair and Martha's curious eyes. He was her solace, her reason to breathe, and her most closely guarded secret. Life in Kansas was hard. Martha worked odd jobs, cleaned houses, waited tables, anything to support herself and David. She never dated, never remarried. How could she? Her heart had been buried with Thomas in the jungles of Vietnam. She dedicated herself to David, a loving, attentive mother, pouring all her shattered dreams into his future. David grew into a kind, thoughtful boy, a good student, and a loving son. He often asked about his father, a vague, shadowy figure who had died heroically in Vietnam. Martha would tell him stories of Thomas, always focusing on his kindness, his intelligence, his love for his country. She never mentioned their brief, passionate romance or the unspoken dreams they had shared. It was too painful, too raw. Meanwhile, a world away, Thomas Anderson was not dead. Chapter 3: The Unbroken Man. The last thing Thomas remembered was the searing heat of the jungle, the deafening explosion, and a blinding flash of white. Then, nothing. He woke up to the smell of damp earth and the incessant buzzing of insects. His head throbbed, his leg was a mass of pain, and a strange, metallic taste filled his mouth. He was in a cage, surrounded by other prisoners of war. He tried to speak, but only a garbled grunt escaped his lips. His memory was a fog, a broken mirror reflecting only fragments. His name, his rank, nothing else. Months blurred into years. The jungle humidity, the sparse rations, the constant fear. He survived on sheer willpower, a primal instinct to stay alive. When the news of the Paris Peace Accords reached their camp in 1973, it was a distant, almost unbelievable whisper of hope. He was among the last group of POWs to be released. A skeletal shadow of his former self, his mind still a battlefield of fragmented memories. Upon his return to the U.S., the homecoming was a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and an overwhelming sense of displacement. His family, though relieved, looked at him with a mixture of awe and fear. He was a hero, they said, but he felt broken, a ghost haunting his own life. He remembered Wilmington, Martha. Her name echoed in the hollow chambers of his mind, a beautiful, haunting melody. He tried to find her. He called her parents' number, but it was disconnected. He visited her old house, but strangers lived there now. He finally tracked down a mutual friend from college. "Martha?" the friend said, her voice laced with sadness. "Oh, Thomas, I'm so sorry. After the news, she just fell apart. She moved back to Kansas, married some farmer, tried to start over." Married. The word hit him like a physical blow. Martha, married. He had fought, survived, endured unimaginable horrors, all with the image of her face burned into his memory. And she had moved on. Had she believed him dead? Had she grieved him? Or had she simply chosen comfort, stability, a new life? The thought stung, a bitter poison. He felt a profound sense of betrayal, of being utterly alone in a world that had moved on without him. Thomas threw himself into his studies, then his career. He became an architect, building sleek, modern structures, his designs reflecting a precise, almost clinical detachment. He moved to Charleston, South Carolina, a city of historical charm, but he kept his distance always. He never married, never truly loved again. How could he, when his heart felt like a hollowed-out shell? He was successful, respected, but profoundly solitary. The echoes of the past, of a love lost and a life that could have been, haunted his quiet evenings. Chapter 4: The Digital Unraveling. 52 years, half a century. David was grown, a successful engineer with a family of his own. Martha was a grandmother, her hair now a soft silver, her hands gnarled with age. But her eyes still held a spark of the determined young woman she once was. She lived a quiet life, filled with the joy of her grandchildren, especially her granddaughter Sarah. Sarah, David's daughter, was a bright, inquisitive young woman, fascinated by history and genealogy. She loved her grandmother fiercely, always encouraging Martha to share stories of her youth. Martha, ever private, rarely divulged much beyond the surface. But Sarah, with her modern tools and digital sleuthing skills, began to uncover bits and pieces. One rainy afternoon, while helping Martha clean out the attic, Sarah stumbled upon a wooden chest tucked away in a dusty corner. Inside, beneath layers of old linens and faded photographs, she found a bundle of letters. Unsent letters, addressed to Private Thomas Anderson, U.S. Army, Vietnam. Sarah looked at her grandmother, a question in her eyes. Martha's face paled, her lips trembling. "Those are old," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just memories." Sarah, sensing a deeper story, carefully opened one. The first letter was dated November 1972. It spoke of Martha's profound grief, her agonizing despair over Thomas's presumed death. "My dearest Thomas," it began, "they told me you're gone. My heart is shattered into a million pieces. I don't know how I can go on without you. And there's something else, darling. Something so precious, so beautiful. But now it feels like a cruel twist of fate. I'm pregnant, Thomas, with our child, our baby." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Pregnant? And her father, David, was born in 1973. It clicked. This was the truth, the secret Martha had carried for over half a century. Over the next few weeks, Sarah devoured the letters, They chronicled Martha's pain, her decision to raise David alone, her constant longing for Thomas, her unwavering love. The letters were a raw, emotional testament to a profound loss. But something nagged at Sarah. The presumed killed in action part. It wasn't confirmed. Armed with these letters and her relentless curiosity, Sarah plunged into the digital archives. She cross-referenced names, dates, military records, using every online tool she could find. It was a painstaking process, but Sarah was determined. She felt a profound connection to her grandmother's buried sorrow, a need to bring closure, even if it was only to a ghost. Then one evening, after hours of searching, a name flashed on her screen. Thomas Anderson, Vietnam veteran, POW. The name was familiar, too familiar. Her heart pounded. She clicked. There was a photo. An older man, his face lined with age, but the eyes were unmistakably Thomas's, and below it, a current address and a name. Anderson Architects, Charleston, South Carolina. He was alive. The revelation hit Sarah like a tidal wave. He was alive. Her grandmother's love, her David's father, was alive. The implications were staggering. 52 years of misunderstanding, of grief, of two lives lived in separate, silent despair. She raced downstairs, the letters clutched in her hand. Martha was sitting in her favorite armchair, knitting. Sarah burst into the room, breathless. Grandma, you won't believe this! He's alive! Thomas is alive! Martha dropped her knitting needles. The yarn unraveled onto the floor. Her face, usually so serene, crumpled into a mask of disbelief, then dawning hope, then profound, raw pain. No, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. No, Sarah, don't play such a cruel trick on an old woman. It's true, Sarah insisted, holding out her phone with the search results. Look, he was a POW. He was captured, presumed dead, but he came back. He's an architect in Charleston. Martha took the phone, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold it. Her eyes scanned the screen, lingering on the photo. Thomas. Older, yes, but it was him. The same strong jawline, the same intensity in his gaze. Oh my God, she breathed, a choked sob escaping her lips. Thomas, he's alive! The unsent letters, the decades of silent grief, the profound misunderstanding, it all came crashing down around her. Chapter 5. A Voice from the Past. The first call was difficult. Sarah, recognizing the fragility of the situation, offered to make it. She dialed the number for Anderson Architects, her heart hammering against her ribs. Anderson Architects, how may I help you? A crisp, professional voice answered. Yes, I'm calling for Mr. Thomas Anderson, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. My name is Sarah, and this might sound strange, but it's regarding something very personal from a long time ago. A pause, then a deeper, older voice came on the line. This is Thomas Anderson. Mr. Anderson, Sarah began. My grandmother is Martha Jenkins, from Wilmington, North Carolina. Do you remember her? Silence. A long, agonizing silence. Sarah could hear the faint sound of breathing on the other end. Then, a low, hesitant voice. Martha? Yes, I remember Martha. His voice held a profound weight, a mixture of disbelief and something akin to pain. Well, Sarah continued, her voice trembling slightly. She thought you were killed in Vietnam. She received a notice, but we found out you were a POW. You're alive, and she never married Mr. Anderson. She never moved on. Another long pause. She married, Thomas said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I heard she married a farmer in Kansas. No, Sarah almost shouted, frustration and urgency bubbling up. That's what you were told. She never married. She raised her son, my father, alone. And she wrote you letters, Mr. Anderson, for years, unsent letters telling you everything about her grief, about her son, our father, your son. The line went dead silent. Sarah held her breath, fearing she had gone too far, that she had broken him. Then, a ragged gasp. My son? The words were barely a whisper, filled with a raw, shattered disbelief. Yes, Sarah confirmed, tears blurring her vision. David, he was born in 1973. After you, after the notice, he's your son. Over the next few days, calls turned into tentative video chats. Martha, initially hesitant, was slowly drawn into the possibility of this miracle. Thomas, too, was grappling with the colossal weight of this revelation. The initial conversations were stilted, awkward, filled with apologies, explanations, and profound regret. I tried to find you, Martha, Thomas said, his voice husky during one of their calls. They told me you'd married. I believed it. My world had just shattered. And I believed you were gone, Thomas, Martha replied, her voice thick with emotion. Every day, for 50 years, I held on to you, to your memory, to our son. The truth was a complex tapestry of misunderstanding, exacerbated by the chaos of war and the limitations of communication in a bygone era. They both had suffered, both had carried silent burdens, both had believed the worst. David, Martha's son, Thomas's son, was initially overwhelmed. He had always known his father died a hero in Vietnam. Now, suddenly, his father was alive. He saw the pain and longing in his mother's eyes, and slowly, a profound sense of wonder replaced his shock. He spoke to Thomas, hesitant at first, then, with growing curiosity and a nascent sense of connection. The man on the screen, a stranger for a lifetime, was his father. Chapter 6, The Pier of Promises. The decision was made. They would meet, not in Charleston or Kansas, but in Wilmington, North Carolina. At their old spot, the pier where they had shared so many dreams, so many unspoken promises. Martha, with Sarah by her side, felt a kaleidoscope of emotions: fear, hope, trepidation, and a profound, aching longing. She chose a simple blue dress, the color of the ocean, a color Thomas had always loved on her. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs as they drove to the pier. Thomas was already there, standing at the very end of the weathered wooden structure, gazing out at the vast expanse of the Atlantic. His back was to them, his posture still straight, but with a slight stoop that spoke of age and burdens carried. He looked just as she remembered him, yet so much older, so much changed. Sarah gently squeezed Martha's hand. "Go, Grandma," she whispered. "He's waiting." Martha walked slowly, each step echoing the passage of time. The salty air filled her lungs, the cries of the seagulls a familiar soundtrack. As she approached, Thomas turned. Their eyes met. 52 years melted away. The world faded, leaving only them. Two souls, linked by a profound love, separated by a cruel twist of fate, now reunited under the wide blue sky. Thomas's eyes, those bright, intelligent eyes she remembered, were filled with tears. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. Martha did the same. And then, without another word, they were in each other's arms. It wasn't a passionate embrace, not at first. It was a holding, a silent acknowledgement of decades lost, of pain endured, of a love that had somehow miraculously survived. Martha buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling the scent of him, a scent she had only dreamed of for so long. She felt his arm tighten around her, a tremor running through his body. "Martha," he choked out, his voice hoarse with emotion. "My Martha. I thought I'd lost you forever." "And I thought you were gone," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "My Thomas." They pulled back, gazing at each other through watery eyes. The lines on his face, the silver in his hair, the deep sadness in his gaze, it was all there. But so was the familiar spark, the profound connection that had drawn them together all those years ago. "I'm so sorry, Martha," he said, his voice breaking. "For everything, for the lost years, for not knowing about David." "And I'm sorry, Thomas," she replied, "for not sending those letters, for not fighting harder to find you." But sorrow was not the only emotion. There was also a profound sense of peace. The heavy weight of silence, of unspoken truths, was finally lifted. Chapter 7: The Unwritten Chapters. The reunion on the pier was just the beginning. There were long, often painful conversations, explanations, forgiveness. Thomas met David, his son, for the first time. It was an awkward, emotional encounter, but one filled with a strange, burgeoning love. David, seeing his mother's renewed joy, opened his heart to this man who was suddenly, miraculously, his father. Martha and Thomas spent hours talking, reliving memories, filling in the gaps of their separate lives. They spoke of the pain, the loneliness, the quiet despair. But they also spoke of the resilience, the strength they had found, and the hope that was now blooming in their twilight years. They learned about each other's journeys. Martha's quiet life in Kansas, raising David, finding joy in small moments. Thomas's successful career, his solitary existence, haunted by ghosts. They found comfort in each other's presence, a quiet understanding that transcended decades of separation. Their love, once vibrant and youthful, had mellowed into something deeper, richer, and more profound. It was a love forged in loss, refined by time, and ultimately rediscovered. They visited their old haunts in Wilmington, walked hand in hand along the beach, sharing stories and quiet laughter. Martha moved to Charleston, a new adventure, a new chapter. She brought with her the unsent letters, now a testament to their enduring connection, a reminder of the path they had walked and the love that had survived. They found joy in simple things, morning coffee together, quiet evenings on Thomas's porch, overlooking the harbor, sharing stories with David and Sarah, who had become their biggest champions. The years they had lost were gone forever, a painful reminder of fate's cruel hand. But the years ahead, however few, were a gift, a second chance, a testament to a love that, despite all odds, had found its way home. The story of Martha and Thomas was a whisper among their friends and family, a modern-day fairy tale of resilience and rediscovered love. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections transcend time, distance, and even the presumed finality of death. Their love, like the tides, had always found its way back to shore, an enduring echo of 50 years.